This is a close reading with annotations of Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen. Remember with any close reading that you want to read through the poem a couple of times first. Don't try to interpret anything at this stage, just get a feel for the poem. Pause the video and read through the piece a few times. Okay, so recall from the close reading checklist that you'll want to make your notations on word choices and look up anything that you're unsure of. Also look for imagery, symbolism, structure, rhyme, all the other literary elements that you see when you read through it slowly and make your annotations. I'm going to walk us through how I might perform a close reading of this poem by Wilfred Owen so you have a model to follow for doing your own. Remember, you can pause the video at any time, rewind, review, watch again, whatever you need to do. So let's start with the title. An anthem is typically a song of praise or gladness. It's even a popular song that identifies a participant in a subculture or maybe a movement of some sort. But just in that initial reading of the piece, there doesn't seem to be an emphasis on praise here. And the word doomed is very somber and menacing almost in tone. Owen is very direct here. He also emphasizes that it's young men who are suffering. They are the ones who are doomed and dying, but the word youth also suggests something about the enthusiasm or eagerness to fight. So I'm just going to make some notations. These are young men. So before we've even gotten into the meat of the poem, the title is already hinting at the contrast between the popular patriotic perceptions of World War I and the terrible doom the soldiers really face. So I'm just going to put that to the side here. Contrast between popular and patriotic perceptions of World War I versus the doom of the soldiers. In calling it an anthem even, I think he kind of questions the very songs that are meant to cheer up and support the troops. So let's dive into the particulars of structure. We haven't yet gone over the closed form of the sonnet, but we'll learn about that next week. So don't worry if you weren't able to recognize the formal structures just yet. We'll get to that. The process of learning how to do close readings builds on skills and knowledge. You have to start somewhere. So in any sonnet there are 14 lines. So a quick count confirms this. We've got 14. And there are two types of sonnet, the Italian and the English, and they're different in organization and rhyme scheme. An Italian sonnet is organized into a grouping of 8 lines and then a second grouping of 6 lines. So you can see here that's what we have in our grouping of 8 and 6. So I've bracketed those off. Typically the first 8 lines here are called an octave, and that sets up the initial theme, idea, or subject matter. The last 6 lines are called a sestet, and this marks kind of a shift in the poem, perhaps offering up an alternative view, an explanation of some sort, an answer to a problem that might have been proposed in those first 8 lines. So we see a shift here, typically with that Italian sonnet form. There's a typical rhyme scheme that follows too, but interestingly, Owen doesn't follow the Italian sonnet rhyme scheme. He uses the English one instead with slight variations. And again, we'll be covering the sonnet in depth soon, and these details will be explained in depth for that lesson, but I'll map out the rhyme in my close reading here for you to see. All you need to do to figure out the rhyme scheme is to look at the very last words in every line. And you start with the letter A and kind of work from there with every new sound designated by a new letter, and every same sound using the same letter. So let's map what Owen does here. And I'm just going to put it to the side here. A, B, C, D, C, D. Then we have E, F, F, E, G, G. So I've just matched all of the rhymes in the end words. And this is the pattern that I've come up with. Slightly different in the third grouping of 4 lines, and that's okay. The last 2 rhyming lines are essential in an English sonnet, and they serve as a final emphasis of the subject or theme, a sort of strong send-off to the whole poem, and that's what happens here. So if we start to see the poem as a combination of 2 types of sonnets, Owens organizes his points through those 2 setups. And let's keep this in mind as we move through the poem. Right now we're just marking observations, not worrying too much about conclusions and interpretations. That'll come towards the end. But I do want to note that we have here the battlefield is our scene, and then we move to the setting of the home in that sestet of the poem. So right now I'm going to start to underline words that seem important, maybe put boxes around other words or images. I'm just trying to visually mark some of my initial thoughts on the page and see if I can make any connections. Don't be afraid to get a little messy. You don't have to worry at this point. Just try to make your thoughts appear on the page. You'll see by the end of mine that I have a lot of notations, and that's okay. So I'm just going to start with line 1 and kind of work my way through. The passing bells are church bells that ring to mark someone's death, and these dead people have not died gloriously. In fact, Owen dehumanizes them by using the metaphor of cattle that are typically slaughtered animals. This is a pretty grisly description. The men have been treated like animals, and typically cows are in herds, so we can kind of imagine that there have been many, many of these terrible deaths. The only thing that really marks their deaths beyond the church bells are the sounds of guns. And here we get that further emphasis on violence. These are monstrous, angry guns too, so these are violent and scary times. In this next line, we have a really interesting use of 2 sound techniques, alliteration and onomatopoeia. Alliteration is when you have a repeating consonant sound, and we see that with the R's here. Onomatopoeia is when those sounds mimic the sound that it is. So think of words like buzz or pop. So with this line or phrase, stuttering rifles rapid rattle, we actually get the sound of the guns firing through the air and within these poetic lines. It's quite a dramatic effect here that adds to that ominous setting and tone of the poem. So I'll just make a quick notation here too that we've got sound and now that further ominous tone. Now I had to look up the word orison here in the next line, and you should do that with anything that you don't know or even things that you think you know, to see if there are alternatives that maybe you might not have considered. An orison is a type of prayer, so he returns to that religious theme, just like with the passing bells in line 1, and now with the prayers on the battlefield here. But the prayers are hasty. And this word underscores the haphazard and furious nature of those gun battles. With the words mockeries and demented choirs of wailing shells. Owen further highlights that he feels the men are dying uselessly in war. We have glorified their deaths, but in reality, the songs on the battlefield, they aren't church choirs but guns. The lonely sounds of bugles from the shires, or what we might call counties, aren't really reaching the men at all. They're too far away from home, and this is where we get that shift that we see with the Italian sonnet format. These last 6 lines will serve to hammer home his point, but he's telling it from a different angle. And he asks a question now to sort of start us off, just like we saw in this opening line. We've shifted from the battlefield as our setting to more of the scene at home, back in England. So what kind of rituals, he sort of asks, could we possibly perform to help these soldiers die more peacefully? We're not really focused on the candles here that we see in that shift. The tears take precedence in their eyes here. Tears are also like a ritual that we perform in certain moments. This is one of sadness, even though Owen uses the words shine and glimmers. These are contradictions again. Reminiscent of the title's setup of contradictions. Remember, the anthem wasn't really one of praise, just like these tears don't really offer up any brightness to the situation. Owen is emphasizing the emotional aspect of grief, the private mourning that goes on. Holding a public vigil with candles is nowhere near as poignant as actual tears. The tears are what's important. In this next line, the pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. I looked those up too. Pallor is just paleness. And pall is a cloth, one that's typically draped over a coffin. So these pale, drained faces of the girls stand in as the covers of these dead soldiers' coffins. The women are left behind by the war, and Owen's forces suffering then to become real, not just a ritual. So I'll put here women left behind. Their suffering is real. There's a sense of sadness. In the final 2 lines, we have that ending couplet of the English sonnet. It serves to sort of round off the poem. This second to last line is perhaps a bit confusing, and I'm not entirely sure of the reading here myself. This is part of the challenge and fun of doing close readings. We don't all have the same interpretations, and when you conduct a close reading and then write an essay about that poem, you're discussing your interpretation and providing that proof to support it. So I might say that this line follows the critical approach to war that Owen has presented so far through the rest of the poem. Perhaps these women and the others at home shouldn't be so patient. They shouldn't wait for the boys to return home. Instead, they shouldn't be so eager to send them off to die. With that final line, we get the image of the blinds closing, image of death. The word slow also supports what's gone on in this last part of the poem, where we've returned to England in this domestic space away from the battlefield. Whereas the bullets were whizzing through the air and the men were falling rapidly on the battlefield, things are moving more slowly at home. The pacing slows down. That drawing of the blinds also works as an image of death. It's a symbol of the closing and ending of life. So I've gone through the whole poem, and finally I'd probably just make some notes about the themes throughout. there was religion, war, death. So I'd make note of that to try to combine these smaller details into those larger categories. And then I might try to summarize what I see happening in the poem. Remember, you go from the smaller details to the larger groupings of themes and images to that thesis about what your poem is talking about when you do that close reading. So remember to review that checklist. So I'd say in this poem, Owen presents his critique of war. The speaker never says the words soldier or war. He never names a country or a particular dispute, but we do know that Owen wrote about World War I and he was English. In a way, he's signaling to us that this poem isn't about specific battles or even individuals. He's writing about the universal topic of the terrible costs and realities of all wars. He also points out that our rituals are unable to alleviate the death and suffering that wars bring about. So those rituals don't alleviate the suffering. It's hard for the people not directly affected by the battle zones and bombardments to understand just how difficult and terrible combat can be. That's what Owen seeks to highlight in his poem. That no matter how much we memorialize, tribute, or honor the fallen, we can't ever really know what it was like for them in those horrible moments before death. The poem strives to really make it impossible for us to ignore those realities. And to realize that in the face of all that horror, our anthems might ring hollow, no matter how much we seek meaning in them. So when you do your close reading, when you're doing your annotations, try to go through your piece the way that I've gone through Anthem for Doomed Youth here. And then this is going to help you analyze your poem, write your essays, and just make your thoughts have some more cohesion, I think. Good luck.